Hi there, my name is Brett Stevenson and I am 24 years old. I am an avid gamer and I have been since my childhood. I live in a small apartment in London. I used to have a roommate called Nubatu. Nubatu was originally from Zimbabwe but has lived over here since he was a child. In Zimbabwe he lived in a small village called Kujalu with his mother and 3 brothers. He never knew who his father was. He was brought into the country, England, when there was a fire in his village and his family was killed. I met him when he showed up in school one day and we became friends quickly. He was living with 2 foster parents. When we left school we both moved out of Leeds to go to London. When I was 22, Nubatu asked me if I would go with him to the site of his original village. I found this kind of strange, considering how he never talked about it. Obviously out of curiosity I asked why he wanted to go back to the village after all these years. He just sort of stared at me for a couple of seconds and walked away. I was so confused I had no idea why he wanted me to go or why he was being so distant. But because we were friends I couldn't say no. We got to the airport and didn't get in one of the larger planes. Instead we met up with a man at one of the terminals. The man was huge, black as black and had a huge burn mark across his face. I was guessing this was another of the villagers who escaped. Nubatu went up to the man and they shook hands and started to speak in their language. Nubatu said something to the man and he looked at me with disgust. He took us to a small plane on the runway and we set off. The whole flight no one ever said a word and we were in the plane for over an hour. When we landed in Africa, but we didn't land in a mainstream airport. Instead we landed in a small field away from almost everything. We got off and walked into a small village nearby. Everyone stared at us as we entered the village. We walked up to a small hut at the end of the village and Nubatu turned to me and said, "Stay here, I promise no one will hurt you." He and the tall man walked into the hut and closed the door. I was outside about 10 minutes until I got too impatient to wait. I took a small peek through the door. Little did I know just what was behind that door. The room was pitch black except for a small light in the middle of the room. Underneath the light was a table with a man strapped to it. The man was screaming and shaking uncontrollably. I was horrified. The man had all of his guts sprawled out along the floor. This is where me being a gamer comes into play. Because I was a gamer I obviously knew what a zombie is. Although I didn't quite realize at first, it suddenly hit me that this is what the man was. I closed the door and immediately threw up all over the floor. Nubatu must have heard the door because he came out furiously. He punched me in the face and threw me on the ground. "Told you to stay out," he yelled in my face. "I'm sorry," I replied. "I was just curious." He shouted at the tall man and said something in their language again. The man picked me up and started pushing me to the plane. Just as we got to the plane a gunshot went off from the hut. The large man pointed to me as if to tell me to stay where I was. He ran off back to the hut. I was in shock. I could hardly breathe and my head was all over the place. I heard a few more shots from the hut. Nubatu, the tall man and 2 other men walked out. One of them had a bottle in his hand with paper in it. He set it alight and threw it at the hut. It instantly went into flames. Nubatu ran up to me and shouted, "Get back into the plane and I will get you back home." I was too much in shock to say anything back so I just climbed back into the plane. One of the other men climbed into the pilot's seat and started up the plane. Just as we were about to set off the man from the table sprinted out of the burning hut and attacked one of the men. He started to tear away at the man's face with his teeth and hands. Nubatu ran up to the zombie and kicked him off the other man. He shot it in the face and then shot the man in the face. The plane started to move. I could see Nubatu on his knees with tears in his eyes. The other men started to burn all the other huts in the village and started shooting villagers. The plane flew off and we were away. The whole flight I just sat there in shock. I cried about 5 times. When we landed the man said nothing, he just let me out and flew away. I didn't go back to my apartment, I just got a train back to my hometown to see my family. It was about 5 a.m. when I got to their house so they were obviously surprised to see me. I spent a few months at their house but I never told them what happened. I never heard from Nubatu again. But while I was still with my family I heard a news report about the fire. Apparently no bodies were found at the village.